Hey, what's up everybody? We are back again, and today we are once again going to be talking about the man himself, Lil Peep. Or to be a little bit more specific, we're going to be talking about the people who were around Lil Peep during the time that he was alive. And if you're a passive observer or casual fan of Lil Peep, you're probably thinking, what is there really to say about his friends? I mean, most people know about Lil Tracy, Goth Boy Click, maybe Bexey, but besides that, it doesn't really go a whole lot deeper. But let me tell you, in the short time that Peep was in the music industry, he made a lot of connections with a lot of different interesting people, and some of these people might have been better than others. So today I want to rank them all. Now you guys are probably thinking, how can you rank people? Are you ranking them based off how good their music is? No, I'm ranking them off how good of a person they are, which I know sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. So within the Peep fan base, after he ended up passing away, there was a whole big conspiracy theory of people speculating who was behind his death. Now I want to make it perfectly clear that I believe Lil Peep killed Peep. I don't believe that there was any malicious intent for somebody to try to kill Peep on purpose. It was definitely an accidental overdose, and even though his management was probably supplying him with drugs on the final tour, he was doing drugs throughout most of his life and he chose to do them on his own. We're not here to spread any conspiracy theories about somebody killing Peep on purpose, even though the fan base has done that on their own with people like Mackned and Bexey, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But my overall point in saying all that is I feel like the Peep fan base places a lot of blame on people who are undeserving of it. I mean, I'm not saying that you should go after anybody, and definitely don't after this video comes out. Don't send anybody any threats, don't harass anybody, this is simply for fun. But I'm just saying, if you're going to be mad at anybody around Peep, then I don't think Bexey and Mackned are as bad as it gets. So stick around and let me tell you how we're going to rank these people. So there's two main factors that are going to play into how people are placed on the tier list. Basically how good of a friend they were to Peep, and then the actions they took after he passed away, whether it was related to Peep or not. So in other words, if you were a great friend to Peep during the entire time that he was alive, but then after he passed away you started scamming all your fans, you're definitely going to move down the list because the actions that you took afterwards weren't really the best. And for the actual tiers, we have good, okay, questionable, bad, horrible, and Young Goth, because once you find out about Young Goth, you're definitely going to understand why he has his own tier all to himself. And with all that said, I'm going to be going through the people in the order that they met Peep during his life. Some people might come a little bit later than they actually met Peep. I don't know absolutely everything about him, but I'm going to try my best. Also, if anybody's left off this list, I also apologize for that. Peep knew a lot of people in the time that he was alive, and I can't cover everybody, but I was able to come up with a list of 40 people that were at least friends with Peep, if not frequent collaborators, so hopefully that's good enough. And if I leave anybody off, make sure to let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll do a follow-up. And if you like the video, well, let me know as well. Now without further ado, let's get into it by starting off with the first friend of Lil Peep that he met during his childhood, Brennan Savage. Now Brennan Savage is a pretty interesting case because once again, like I said, he met Peep during his childhood. The two of them were friends over the time that they were growing up, and eventually after Peep graduated high school and wanted to move LA to pursue music, he moved with Brennan Savage. Now there was some rumors that him and Brennan ended up getting in a fight, leading Peep to get kicked out and moving back in with his mother, but most of that seems to be untrue and was really only Peep over exaggerating things to his mom on the phone. I mean, after all, friends get into fights, it happens all the time, and it really doesn't seem all that serious with the two of them still being good friends at the time that Peep passed away. So overall, I would say that Brennan Savage should go in good, except there is one factor I gotta mention. Recently in 2024, Brennan Savage ended up getting into a beef with Killstation, and he actually ended up falsely accusing him of being a which is definitely not a good thing to do and doesn't make him a good friend to Killstation. If he's willing to do something so malicious only because he got into a fight with somebody who's supposed to be a good friend of his, it would make me believe a little bit more that him and Peep did have some pretty aggressive fights, but either way, I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm going to put him in okay for now, and yeah, let's move on to the next. Next up, we got Omen 13, and really there's not a whole lot to say about him. He seemed to be a pretty good friend to Peep, meeting him pretty early on in his career when he was still living with his mom and making music in his bedroom. The two of them ended up making a mixtape together called In the Bedroom I Confess, and then after Peep ended up moving to California, he would hang out with Omen in real life, and the two of them always seemed to be really good friends, never really having a whole lot of issues. Omen would often accompany Peep to the Schema House, eventually getting to meet a bunch of different collaborators through that, and of course setting his career off to a good start, although I wouldn't really say that Omen was ever really using Peep to get around people. It just so happened that him and Peep would hang out quite a bit, and of course Peep was living at the Schema House during that period, so it makes sense that the two of them would often hang out there. Eventually though, Omen would get to know Craig Zen, and the two of them would break off and form their own group, and because of that, Peep and Omen were no longer able to hang out on the daily, but despite that, it seems like him and Peep remained pretty good friends throughout the rest of his life, and even after Peep passed away, it never seemed like Omen really tried to use him for clout, as he already had a pretty solid career on his own. So overall, I gotta say Omen was a good friend. So we're actually off to a pretty good start. We already got somebody in good, and we already have somebody in okay, but next up, we gotta talk about Bexey, and let me tell you, Bexey is a very contentious figure in the Lil Peep community, although I gotta gotta say, I'm kind of a defender of his. Because to me, I always felt like Bexey got the short end of the stick. I mean, he's one of the most hated people to ever be around Lil Peep, although it does seem like he was actually a good friend to him throughout most of his life. The two of them ended up meeting when Peep was still making music in his bedroom, and apparently Peep was the first one to reach out to Bexey as he was actually the bigger artist at the time, but after Peep ended up making Star Shopping, Bexey would then reach out to him, and the two of them ended up making music together. With the two of them eventually dropping an EP known as Romeo's Regrets, as well as making a couple music videos together where half of it was shot in the UK and the other half was shot in America. And as time went on and Peep got bigger and bigger, eventually moving to California, he would still keep in contact with Bexey, with the two of them talking on the phone almost every single day. Unfortunately though, Peep would start to fall into the LA lifestyle, doing a bunch of drugs, getting around a bunch of people who didn't really care about him, and he realized that he had to leave California and go somewhere else to detox. And he actually ended up going to the UK for about 3 months to meet up with Bexey and actually live with them. And during this period, Peep was actually pretty sober, only smoking weed, although unfortunately he would eventually leave, going back to California to do another tour, and he actually ended up bringing Bexey with him. And this is where everything went horribly wrong, with a moment that would define Bexey's life forever, because as we already know, Lil Peep would unfortunately end up overdosing on that very same tour, and Bexey, never really doing drugs before, but trying them for the first time on this tour, was way too high, ended up going to the back of the bus, shooting a video of Peep after he was unfortunately already passed away, and he ended up posting that on Snapchat.
Apparently Peep's at the back of the bus doing press-ups, sit-ups, working on his six-pack, his muscles. I'm gonna see for myself.
Which of course was terrible. Everybody ended up seeing Peep's dead body. Nobody really wanted that out there for the world to see, and unfortunately Bexey was the person who put it out there. He would later post another video on his Snapchat crying over the death of Peep, but unfortunately with him being on whatever drug that he was on at the time, it came off as very disingenuous as he wasn't able to show a whole lot of emotion, and unfortunately the damage was already done.
My brother just died in my arms, man. I'm done with this shit, man, forever. Fuck this shit.
However, I do truly believe that he didn't mean to film Peep after he was already passed away. I do think it was an honest mistake, but either way, it was definitely a pretty big mistake, and Peep's mom never seemed to forgive him for it. And things would get even worse for Bexey once the whole clothing scandal started off. Basically, Peep gave away a bunch of his clothes to different people that he was friends with, but it seems like Peep's mom didn't want them to have it and instead wanted to collect them all for herself, but Bexey didn't want to give back a headband that Peep had given to him. He ended up wearing it in a music video trying to pay respects to Peep, but to a lot of people it came off as disrespectful, like he was mocking him after he already passed away, and then things got even worse after the whole X and Peep song came out. If you don't know about this, let me try to explain it to you pretty quick. Basically, X and Peep had a collaboration track together that came out after both of them had passed away. X was aware that he was going to be on the song, but Peep wasn't, as he had passed away before X. Many of Peep's friends like Fat Nick and Bexey would talk about how the track was a great idea and that Peep would have wanted it, while other people like Fishnarc talked about the fact that Peep never really liked X, although it doesn't seem to be true with all the research that I did.
I give her dictionary.
But either way, it started quite a bit of controversy, and many fans would believe that Bexey was trying to capitalize on Peep passing away, with him even going on No Jumper to talk about the track, as well as different stories about Lil Peep. And even though I truly believe that he was only trying to pay respects to his fallen friend, he really hasn't done anything to help himself out in the following years, because he hasn't been able to let it go, and hasn't been able to let go of the fact that Liza doesn't really like him. With him constantly asking her to put out tracks that the two of them made together, even if it means that his verse gets cut off of it, although Liza doesn't really want to do that because she kind of picks and chooses who gets to be on the songs and who doesn't. I understand her perspective, I understand his, but either way I think it's a bad look, and I think at this point he really needs to let it go or people are never going to leave him alone. Even to this day, many people will hop in his comment sections telling him to kill himself, so he definitely got more shit than almost anybody else around Peep, although to me it doesn't feel like it's fully deserved, but either way I'm gonna give him an okay and move on. Next up we got Sowhatimdead, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's a little bit awkward to me to talk about him because I actually somewhat know him, but it does seem like in his past he has scammed a little bit. I'm not really sure what his connection to Peep was. The two of them met when Peep was still making music in his mom's house. It doesn't really seem like they continued to be friends throughout the rest of his career, but I wouldn't really say one way or the other. From everything I've heard, he's kind of a reformed reformed scammer. He doesn't really seem to be doing it anymore, but if you told me that he's still trying to scam people to this day, I would have to believe you. So honestly, I'm going to put him in questionable and move on. Next up, we got Boy Froot. Now, Boy Froot was actually part of a collective known as Heartbreak Club, which Peep was also part of. The two of them have a collaboration EP together, although I'm not really sure what type of connection they had back in the day. But either way, nowadays, Boy Froot hates Lil Peep, he hates Lil Peep's mom, he doesn't want to release any of the music that the two of them made together, so honestly, I feel like I gotta put him in bad and move on. Next up, we got Lil Skil, and a lot of people don't even really know about Lil Skil anymore. He was once again another person who met Peep in his early days when he was making music in his mom's bedroom. The two of them ended up creating the track together known as Nuts when Skil was going under the name Rainy Bear. That's one of my favorite Lil Peep tracks of all time, so I definitely gotta give him points for that, but at the same time, I do think that he lied about being Lil Peep's cousin. I'm not sure if he's the one who started that rumor himself or if it was somebody else, but either way, it doesn't seem to be true. But besides that, he did seem to be a pretty good friend to Peep. I haven't really heard anything all too bad about the guy, besides the fact that he seems to be kind of out of his mind and will often post schizophrenic things on his story, but that's not really his fault if he's mentally ill, so honestly, I'm gonna put him in okay and move on. Next up, we got the man himself, Young Goth, and let me tell you, he's definitely the worst person that was ever around Peep, and unfortunately, he was around Peep for a very long time. The two of them first met at the very start of Lil Peep's career when he was still making music in his bedroom, before they then moved in together with It's Okay to Cry, before eventually abandoning him in the middle of the night and then moving to LA. And basically everywhere that Lil Peep went, Young Goth would follow along until around October 2017 when Lil Peep would finally cut him off after some pretty bad allegations ended up coming out. But before that, the two of them spent a lot of time together, and it's pretty clear that Young Goth was one of the main people who got Peep into doing cocaine and harder drugs. He was doing Xanax and weed when he was living with his mom, but after he moved out and moved in with him, he started doing cocaine. It's also heavily rumored that Young Goth and Lil Peep were actually in a romantic relationship, and because of that, Lil Peep would speak very highly about him to his mother, meaning that Liza still believes that Young Goth is a good guy to this day. But it wasn't long after Peep passed away that a bunch of terrible allegations came out about Young Goth talking to young girls on Snapchat, leading many people to cut him off in Goth Boy Clique as well as the wider emo rap genre. But even with all that happening, the Lil Peep fanbase would keep it under wraps because after all, Liza likes Young Goth, and basically anybody that Liza likes, the rest of the fanbase will follow along, which eventually led up to Liza putting out a collaboration mixtape between Young Goth and Lil Peep after Peep had already passed away, which of course was heavily controversial, seeing as how Young Goth would definitely make money off of that mixtape. Many fans would complain about it, but the pretty overbearing moderation on the Lil Peep subreddit would make it so it wouldn't go that far, and unfortunately Young Goth ended up making a lot of money off of the music that him and Peep made together, and he would use that money to continue his lifestyle, and unfortunately this would lead to him getting even more victims, with him meeting up with girls on Tinder, eventually inviting them over to his apartment where he would then be very pushy with them, drugging their drinks, and eventually taking advantage of them. And this would continue to happen into 2023 and 2024. In fact, it could still be happening to this day. Some girls have managed to avoid him after the video that I did on him came out, but unfortunately we're not able to warn everybody at once, and it's definitely possible that he's still taking advantage of girls to this day. So yeah, definitely a very despicable human being. He definitely deserves to be in prison, but despite that, we gotta put him in the Young Goth category for now and move on. Next up, we got It's Okay to Cry, and this basically ends off the Lil Peep bedroom era. The two of them ended up meeting through SoundCloud sometime in 2015. Lil Peep would eventually end up moving in with It's Okay to Cry. The two of them would create some music together. They ended up doing a bunch of drugs. Eventually, they ended up having a falling out over who created the whole heartbreak aesthetic. Apparently, It's Okay to Cry thought that he came up with it, and Lil Peep thought that he came up with it. There's also rumors that Cry ended up stealing a bunch of Peep's clothes and never ended up giving them back, despite the fact that Liza went so hard on people like Bexey and Mackned. But either way, it seems like Peep and Cry really hated each other, eventually leading Peep to move out in the middle of the night without telling him, completely abandoning him to pay the rent on his own. And Cry would try to claim that that made him go homeless, but he actually has a bunch of money from his family, so that's probably not true. And then after Peep passed away years later, Cry would make a song talking about how he wished that he could have saved him, which, let's be honest, he only did that for clout, so honestly he was trying to use Peep's name to get himself more fame, so that's not really a good thing to do. And on top of that, with Peep and him hating each other, I feel like I gotta put him in the bad category. Oh yeah, and on top of that, he's also a massive scammer, and he even has a couple allegations of talking to young girls on Snapchat, which have never really been confirmed, but either way, having those allegations definitely isn't a good thing, so yeah, bad. Next up we got Jimmy V, and there's really not a whole lot to say about this guy. He was basically somebody who hung out with Lil Peep during the time that he was living with It's Okay to Cry and Young Goth. They did a bunch of drugs together. He made a little bit of music. For the most part, it never really seemed like he did anything all that bad to Peep, but from everything I've heard about him, he's basically a burnt out drug addict that walks around LA with shit hanging off the back of his sweatpants. I'm not really sure if he's still doing that to this day, but either way, hopefully he gets better. Although there is one really weird story about Jimmy V that people often talk about, where apparently he used to be part of the collective Anti-World, which is Cyber's collective if you know who that is. And apparently him and another member of the collective going by the name of Ego Mackie ended up getting into some sort of altercation of the sexual nature, where Jimmy V claimed that Ego Mackie actually raped him, but Ego Mackie claimed that Jimmy V raped him. I have no idea what went down there whatsoever, but either way it led to Anti-World falling apart. So if Jimmy V did actually do that, then he's definitely a bad guy, but for right now I'm gonna put him in okay and move on. Next up we got Craig Zen, and Craig Zen honestly hated Lil Peep. The two of them never really seemed to get along, even though they do have a couple tracks together. Craig claimed that he wanted Peep to get off of drugs, so he would always be mean to him every time that he was on drugs. Kind of a tough love type of situation, but either way, the main story that I know about Craig Zen and Lil Peep is that they actually shared a room at the Schema House. Basically, when Peep was on tour, Craig would be there, and when Peep was home, Craig would be somewhere else. But every time that Craig knew Peep was about to come home and he was gonna leave, he would basically piss all over the walls, make a huge mess, throw things everywhere, and of course do everything he could to make Peep's life a living hell. This led to the two of them eventually falling out. Craig does claim that him and Peep ended up making up before he passed away, but we don't really know that for sure, so either way, I'm gonna put him in meh and move on. Next up we got Ghostemane, and honestly I don't think Ghostemane ever really did anything all that bad to Lil Peep, at least not anything that I ever heard about. The two of them did end up leaving Schema Posse around the same time, and apparently Ghostemane used Peep leaving as an excuse for him to leave as well. Despite that, it seems like the two remained on pretty good terms after they left Schema Posse, but I gotta be honest with you, it seems like Ghostemane is quite a vile human being with multiple accusations of beating women as well as being very manipulative and abusive. To be fair, none of these accusations have ever really been proven, but he did make multiple of his exes sign NDAs so they couldn't talk about him anymore in the future. On top of that, apparently he became so hated within California that he actually had to move to New Hampshire. I've also heard stories of him financially abusing his own mother by basically saying that if she does anything that pisses him off, he won't pay her rent anymore, and of course he ended up buying her a really big house so she can't pay it on her own. And from everything I've heard about him, he seems to be a very egotistical control freak who basically wants everybody around him to praise him 24/7. He can't handle if anybody gets more fame than him, and he basically has closed himself off from everybody because of that. So yeah, if you believe the accusations, he's definitely a pretty despicable human being as well, so I'm definitely going to put him in horrible, but if you don't believe him, well, I guess you could put him in okay. Up next we got Jay Green, and this is definitely a very contentious one, because if you watch the Lil Peep documentary, you would definitely think that Jay Green was a good guy, but he was basically lying the entire time that he was on screen during that documentary. He basically said in that documentary that if Lil Peep had stuck with Schema Posse, he would still be alive to this day, but anybody that was in Schema Posse around that time could tell you that Peep was still doing a lot of drugs when he was with them. Not to mention Jay Green wasn't properly paying Peep for all the shows that he was doing around the time, as well as purposely isolating him from the rest of the members of the Schema Posse so he could have full control over his entire career. This would eventually lead to Lil Peep completely leaving Schema Posse to go on tour with Fat Nick, with Jay Green being very upset about that and constantly talking shit about Lil Peep throughout the rest of his life, until eventually Cold Blooded was able to mend their connection. And basically as soon as Lil Peep passed away, Jay Green would immediately release tracks that were already released with him, Ghostemane, and Lil Peep, cutting off Ghostemane's verse to try to advertise them as brand new songs, capitalizing off of Peep's death. And to me, there's no other way you could look at that besides being a complete cash grab. It would be an entirely different story if it was an unreleased Lil Peep track, but to me, this comes off as him trying to use Peep after he passed away. And on top of that, with Jay Green constantly lying in the Lil Peep documentary to try to make himself look better, he definitely made a lot of other people around Peep look a whole lot worse. So he might have unintentionally played into the whole hate campaign that was happening against Goth Boy Click at the time, or let's be honest, he probably did it intentionally because he was definitely pretty pissed off with Goth Boy Click for taking Lil Peep away from him. So yeah, definitely not a great guy. I'm gonna put him in questionable. Up next we have Killstation, and I really don't have anything bad to say about the guy whatsoever. He's definitely going through a mental health crisis right now, but he did seem to be a pretty good friend to Lil Peep overall, seems to be a pretty solid guy, and I'm hoping that he gets better mentally and can start making music again. So yeah, I'm gonna put him in good. And next up we actually have another person that I'm gonna put in good, going by the name of Cold Blooded. Now many of you might might have not heard of him before because he is a bit of an older member of Schema Posse, but I actually have an entire video about him if you want to check that out. It goes into the history of the entire Schema Posse, and I think it's a pretty interesting watch. But overall, if you watch that video, then you know that he always tried to look out for Peep, and he was even able to reconnect Jay Green and Peep after their falling out, so it seems like he was a good friend, and I'm gonna put him in good. After that, we got Nedarb, who's actually a producer for Lil Peep. He made the beat for Beamer Boy, which of course is very iconic, but overall I don't know a whole lot about the guy. He seems to be pretty solid, although I have heard from some people that he is a bit of a dick. However, it seems like him and Lil Peep never really had a whole lot of issues, so I'm gonna put him in okay for now, and he might move up, he might move down, not sure. Up next we got SinceWhen, and if you haven't heard of him before, I wouldn't really blame you. I wasn't even aware of him either until he ended up trying to scam a couple people on the Peep Discord for an old Peep feature that he had. He had apparently been teasing the Lil Peep fanbase with this feature for the past 7 years, never giving it to Liza, never giving it to anybody who could officially release it, and sitting on it trying to get more likes and attention off the back of it. Although it seems like he fell on hard times because he actually tried to sell it to somebody for $5,000, but after he stopped responding to them, they actually charged back and still got the song at the same time, leaking the entire thing. So yeah, SinceWhen is definitely a scammer, but he is a failed scammer at that, which is honestly even more pathetic. I have an entire video on that if you want to check it out, but for now I'm going to put him in bad. Up next we got Smokeasac, and honestly I don't really know a whole lot about this guy besides the fact that he did a lot of production on Come Over When You're Sober Part 2, which a lot of fans didn't really like. However, despite that, I do really think that he was trying to do the best for his fallen friend. He wasn't trying to go out of his way to make something that wouldn't represent him in a proper way, and whether he succeeded at that or not is up for debate, but it didn't seem to be malicious either way. And we would eventually get the original cut of Come Over When You're Sober Part 2, so at this point there's no real reason to complain about him. The only thing that you could really say about him is that he heavily endorsed the X and Peep collab, but honestly he wasn't the biggest perpetrator of that, so I'm gonna put him in good for now. Next up we got BigHead. There's not really a whole lot to say about him. He's a pretty well known producer. He ended up making Witchblades for Lil Peep, and then after that he went on to work with Lil Pump. He had a really bad addiction problem for a while, and I'm not talking about the average Xanax and lean. He was actually addicted to fentanyl, leading a lot of the people around him to look at him like he was completely out of his mind. But he would eventually get sober, and nowadays it seems like he's doing a lot better, so I'm gonna put him in good. Next up we got Chapo, and honestly I think that Chapo was a very good friend to Lil Peep. The two of them come from completely different worlds, and in any other circumstance you probably wouldn't expect them to be friends, but they ended up bonding over their love of emo rap. The two of them hung out on the daily, and eventually after Peep passed away, Chapo would pay respects without trying to use him for any form of clout. So overall I gotta say, good guy Chapo, I'm gonna put him in good. Now for some reason I actually put Post Malone on the list. I'm not really sure how close him and Peep were, but after Peep passed away he would talk very highly about him, so I'm gonna put him in good, and that's really all there is to say. Up next we got young Cortex, one of the other producers who worked on Witchblades, and I already have 2 videos about this guy scamming people in the underground. However, he is a very unique case where sometimes if you buy a beat from him he'll actually deliver, but the other half of the time he won't. He says that he wants to make things right with everybody, but he's never actually taken the effort of trying to get people their beats back or try to refund them, so overall at least he's trying I guess, but I'm still gonna put him in bad. Alright, now we're gonna get into the people that were in Goth Boy Clique, and we're gonna start off with Coldheart. And honestly I feel like Coldheart was a very good friend to Lil Peep. I mean, he's actually the reason that Lil Peep ended up getting into Goth Boy Clique in the first place, which you could definitely take as a good or a bad thing, but either way it definitely seemed like he was trying to help Peep out. The two of them ended up making quite a bit of music together, but it always happened very organically. He was never hitting up Peep for a feature to try to get clout off of him. They only wanted to make music when it felt right. After Peep passed away, Coldheart would actually go out of his way to actually testify in court to help Peep's mom win the full rights to all of his music, and besides that he seems to be a really low-key chill guy, so honestly I'm gonna put him in good, although I don't know if we can say the same for the rest of Goth Boy Clique. Alright, next up we got Lil Tracy, and this one's gonna be very controversial because to many people in the fan base, Tracy is an angel who can't do anything wrong. He was the de facto best friend of Lil Peep, and everybody else was trying to use him. But that narrative doesn't fully make sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, the two of them were definitely pretty close friends for a couple months when Peep first got into Goth Boy Clique, but they would eventually have a falling out that was never repaired in Peep's lifetime. Now this falling out happened for a multitude of reasons. The basic narrative online is that Lil Tracy was very jealous of Lil Peep for him getting more attention for the songs that the two of them made together, although there's definitely more to it than that, because Tracy would often describe hanging out at Peep's house because Peep actually had a house and Tracy was basically couch hopping, and then Peep's management would show up and kick him to the curb and Peep wouldn't do anything about it, which considering the fact that that was supposed to be his best friend definitely hurt his feelings. But the straw that broke the camel's back is when Lil Peep ended up going to Russia and performing Witchblades without Lil Tracy, and he felt like he was being completely cut out of his his own music. So Tracy decided to completely go off on Peep online, although you got to keep in mind that Tracy is bipolar, so it's definitely possible that this was a little bit of an episode, but it went on for a couple months after that as well. Peep would try to do everything he could to get Tracy to be his friend again, but Tracy wouldn't hear it. He even ended up going on No Jumper and talking shit about Lil Peep a couple days before he passed away. When Awful Things came out, Lil Tracy ended up calling it trash and asking for it to be taken down, so he was definitely feeling very negative about Peep before he passed away, and then after Peep passed away, he ended up tweeting out, "Is Peep dead? LOL." Which definitely did rub a lot of fans the wrong way, but as time went on, it definitely seemed like Tracy felt very bad for the way that he treated Peep during his life, with him crying at multiple shows, doing a bunch of tribute albums to him, constantly talking about how close of friends they really were, although some people do feel like Tracy is kind of using Peep for clout, although I'm not really sure how to feel about that. Overall, some people would call it a brotherly fight, other people would call it more spiteful than that, but that's not really what I'm talking about right now, because unfortunately, I do have to speak about the fact that Lil Tracy does have a couple accusations of his own. Now keep in mind, I've never really looked into these before, I've never covered it on the channel, so I definitely don't feel confident in saying that they're actually true, but Lil Tracy does have some allegations that have been floating around for a while that he was talking to little girls on Discord. There's even an entire leaked dick pic that apparently was sent to an underage girl, although I'm not sure if there's anything to back it up. All I do know is that when DJ Academics tried to cover the story back in 2018, Lil Tracy actually tried to sue him, so it seems like there might be a little bit behind that. But I'm not going to take a side one way or the other. People can talk about it in the comments below, let me know what you think about it, but for now, I'm going to put him in questionable, which I know is going to be very controversial. Most people probably thought that Lil Tracy would be in good, but with all of that combined, he has to be questionable. Next up, we got Horsehead. I don't really know shit about Horsehead besides the fact that he basically ruined every single song that he ever had with Lil Peep. So he has to go in bad for that. Nah, I'm just kidding. He seems to be a pretty alright guy, with him actually performing the very night that Peep passed away, trying to distract all the fans away from the fact that the police were taking his body off of the tour bus. It didn't really work. A lot of fans found out about it and they all ended up rioting in the street, but either way, he tried, so you gotta give him props for that. The only other thing I know about him is apparently Lil Tracy actually ended up pissing on his porch at one point to try to get back at him because they were in a beef. Not really sure what the story is behind that, but either way, let's put him in okay and move on. Now I'm going to be honest with you, you could probably lump JP Dream Thug, Doves, and Yawns all into the same group. I don't really know anything about them. They seem to be pretty good friends to Peep. I haven't heard anything all that bad about them, so I'm going to put them all in okay. I would say the same thing for Wiccaface. He was a member of Goth Boy Clique during the same time that Lil Peep was, but he didn't live with the whole collective, so I don't think the two of them were around each other all that much, meaning they're probably only acquaintances, so I'm going to put them in good. Now the only other member of Goth Boy Clique that I want to talk about is Fishnarc, because he definitely is a little bit controversial. He never really did anything all that bad to Peep besides the fact that he is the one who started the rumor that Peep didn't like X. I understand that he felt like he was trying to defend his friend and his emotions were probably pretty high because Peep had passed away not too long ago, but either way it didn't really feel like the right place and time to do something like that, so it depends how you feel about Fishnarc. You could either say that it was good, okay, maybe bad, but I'm going to put him in okay. And funnily enough, we're now going to see the other side of things because we're going to talk about Fat Nick, who is a very controversial friend of Lil Peep. Now Nick was probably the most outspoken person after Peep passed away, with him constantly talking about how Peep wanted to leave Goth Boy Clique, he wasn't really fucking with them at the time that he passed away, and that Peep would have definitely wanted that X song to come out. On top of that, a lot of people feel like Fat Nick was actually using Lil Peep even before he passed away, with him taking him on tour with him, which you would think would be a good thing with Fat Nick giving Lil Peep more exposure, but at the same time there is a lot of accounts that Fat Nick was being overly controlling of Peep on that tour, as well as him sipping lean on the daily, eventually convincing Peep to start sipping lean as well, although he probably already was doing lean before that point. And probably the most controversial moment between the two of them is that Fat Nick actually ended up giving Lil Peep 50 Oxycontin and 100 Xanax on his birthday on November 1st. Now keep in mind, Lil Peep passed away on November 15th, only 14 days after his birthday, meaning that he consumed that many drugs in only 14 days and was already looking for more. So that goes to show just how bad of an addiction Lil Peep had at the time, but a lot of people do think that Fat Nick was also being a bad friend for supplying him with so many drugs, although that is kind of up for interpretation. Some people think that it's Peep that took the drugs on his own accord, which is kind of what I believe, but at the same time, you probably shouldn't be giving an addict that many drugs. So with all that said, I would probably put Fat Nick in questionable, but the thing about him is that he actually has allegations too. I know, big surprise. Apparently him and Puya actually ended up drugging and a couple girls on tour. According to most of the allegations, it usually seems like Puya is the mastermind behind the whole operation, although Fat Nick is definitely complicit in helping as well. With some accounts saying that Puya actually forces groupies to suck Fat Nick's dick before they can with anybody else on the team, so yeah, Fat Nick is definitely part of it. So we're gonna put Bro in horrible, and if we want to consider Puya as part of the list as well, although I don't really think he was all that close to Lil Peep, I would also put him in horrible. I mean, it's only allegations, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I definitely believe the allegations when it comes to Puya. We're coming to the end of the list, and I'm gonna do a speed round at this point. We got Machiavelli. I'm not really sure what his connection to Peep was, but he is a scammer, so I'm gonna put him in bad. Next up, we got Gabe, who's a freaking collaborator of Lil Peep. I haven't really heard of him doing anything bad to Peep or him scamming anybody. He seems like an altogether pretty good guy, so I'm gonna put him in good. Next up, we got I Love McConan. Him and Peep ended up making an entire collaboration album together to mixed results. A lot of people really don't like McConan singing on that project, but either way, he definitely seemed to be a very good friend to Lil Peep. The two of them never really ended up doing drugs together. They were definitely a little bit more than friends, but either way, I would say that McConan never really did anything all that bad to Peep, at least nothing that I've heard about, so I'm gonna put him in good. Next up, we got Curb Lagoop, and once again, I'm not really sure what the connection between him and Lil Peep was. I do believe that Curb met him very late into his life, so there wasn't really a lot of time for him to do anything bad to Peep. I've also never really heard anything all too bad about Curb, so I'm gonna put him in okay. Next up, we got Charlie Shuffler. I actually recently made a video on him scamming a couple people. He did say that he was gonna pay them back, so maybe he will find the light at the end of the tunnel, but either way, I'm gonna put him in questionable. We then have Leric, and I basically heard from multiple people that this guy is a complete asshole. He's not really appreciative for anything that he has, and he's always a dick to everybody around him. He also literally lives with young Goth even to this day, so being roommates with a definitely is going to push you down the pyramid a little bit, so I'm going to put him in bad. After that, we got Wiggy and Nick Blanco. I haven't really heard anything all too bad about them. There was a recent story where it seems like Nick Blanco might have been part of a kind of scam that was going on with Casper, but I'm not really sure if that was intentional or not, so I'm going to put both of them in meh. After that, we have Marty Baller. I'm not really sure who this guy is whatsoever, but he does have a couple songs with Lil Peep, although I do have a video coming out on him pretty soon, so stick around for that. We then have Drippin' So Pretty, who I'm not really sure how close he was with Lil Peep, but either way, he does seem to be a pretty good guy, so I'll put him in okay. And then finally, we have the man himself, the most hated person to ever be around Lil Peep, Mackned. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think that Mackned is a little bit overhated. I definitely understand why a lot of people did blame him for the death of Lil Peep. I mean, after all, he ended up bringing the drugs on the bus that would eventually lead to his overdose. And after Peep ended up passing away, he posted a pretty brain dead caption talking about how he was blessed that he ended up coming off the bus, and he wished that everybody else had of as well, which came off to many as he was bragging that he was still alive and Peep wasn't. I mean, the guy definitely messed up in different ways, but you also got to keep in mind that he was heavily addicted to heroin at the time, and do you really expect a heroin addict to be able to take control of any situation? I mean, he probably should have checked up on Peep. He was kind of the leader of Goth Boy Clique during that time, but you know what, we can all say that we would have done this or we would have done that, but none of us were there, so we don't know if we would have acted any different in that situation. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, and a lot of people are going to say that I'm letting him off too easy, but at least he actually took accountability for everything that went down that night. He got sober, he ended up going to rehab, and he now actually works at a rehab where he helps other people get sober. And to me, it's really nice to see that redemption. I mean, after all, he could have kept going down the same path, he could have kept doing drugs, he could have kept scamming his fans, being a shitty guy, but instead, he decided to change his life up. Does that mean that he was a good guy before? I'm not really sure, but nowadays, he seems to be pretty alright. And that's more than you can say for probably half of these guys, although I'm going to be honest with you, there was a lot more good people than I thought there would be when I initially started making this video, although the people who are bad are definitely terrible. But yeah, with all that said, where would I put Mackned? Well, factoring everything in, the hate campaign, the fact that he was addicted to heroin, the fact that his father passed away right before Peep passed away, and that he actually tried to get better, I'm going to put him in questionable. Yep, that's right, I'm going right down the middle. You can call me a coward for that if you want, but either way, it's my list, that's where I'm putting him, and with that said, that is all the friends of Lil Peep ranked. I think at least. If I missed anybody, make sure to let me know in the comments below, or if I put anybody in the wrong spot, then you can definitely definitely let me know as well. And with all that said, I just want to say that the next time you're arguing with somebody over Lil Peep and they're saying that Mackned is the worst person to ever be around them, you should show them this video and say that, hey, it gets a whole lot worse and a whole lot more deranged before you get to the bottom of the hole. Or, I don't know, leave me a hate comment and say that you want to kill me, that I got everything wrong, that I don't know anything. You can do whatever you want. I'm not your fucking dad. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but subscribe to the channel, please. This video took a long time to do. Subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 30K by the end of the year, so if you could do that, it would really help me out. And with all that said, I will see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye.